Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Some of you are probably watching live, and some of you will be watching this later on Facebook. But I wanted to welcome you today to hear from my friends. We're going to dive into the racial injustice and all the issues that maybe are surrounding that in our world today. And our intention today is to invite you into a conversation that is more like family versus an interview style. We want you to lean in with us in some of the difficult questions that we have with one another and the trust that we have with one another, where everything is safe. The reason it's safe is because all of these people are people that I love and trust, that over the years that I've known them, they are people that have shown me that they love Jesus with everything that they have. And so it's a blessing to hear their hearts in the midst of all the things that we're trying to find answers to right now. It might not always be a comfortable conversation. It might be ones where we get a little heated with one another. That has happened before, trust me. And yet it is safe because we love one another, we know one another, and our relationship will stand the truth and the weight of sometimes disagreeing or sometimes trying to figure out what that looks like. So I want to introduce them to you, and then I would like them to just share a couple of things, and then we'll get right into our conversation. So to my, actually everyone's to my left, so that makes it pretty easy. But the first person, Dave Wilkins. Dave hails from Chicago, just outside of Chicago, but now is the City Life MLK Riverside Director with Youth for Christ. And so I'm thrilled to have him on our team. So next person, Davey Blackburn. Davey, I don't know whether you remember, but we met on this stage a long time ago at a banquet, and you've been forever a good friend of Youth for Christ and of mine, and I'm thankful that you're joining our conversation this morning, so thanks. Yasmin Klein is our Parent Life Director, oversees all of our Parent Life ministry, a very successful ministry to young moms and dads who are pregnant and parenting, and she brings a very unique perspective to this conversation and to our team, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. Antonio Patton, otherwise known for many of you who might know him, Kingdom Chaser, Pavement Pounder, Jesus over everything. We can choose many taglines that come with Antonio. Brother, I love you. I'm thankful that you're on our team, and we look forward to hearing from you today. Justin Lange-Bottles, this is probably the person I've known the longest. I don't think you were in a toddler group when we first met, but it was pretty darn close, right? So, and I've seen Justin grow up and love him, love his family, is now a minister at Eagle Church, where we're hosting this from today, and is also oversees missions at this point, and is just a wonderful partner to Youth for Christ, and we're very thankful. Danny Marquez, my brother, near West Side, City Life, oversees all of our City Life ministries. Many of you might have already heard some of his story, but brings a really clear and unique perspective to the conversation we have today. And again, another trusted voice in my life. So this is how it's going to work. There is a question box, or maybe you're looking at this on Facebook later. We want to hear from you. However, this is one of 3 times we're going to do this. We're going to have different conversations each time, maybe bring some kids in, some different people. But we also want to entertain your questions as you have them. However, today we won't be answering them, but we will answer them. We'll answer them from this stage at some point. But so if you think of something or you have a comment, please feel free to write that. We want to hear from you because we want you a part of this conversation. At the end of this, I will jump back on and just wrap us up, give us an opportunity to understand what is next, how to welcome you into this conversation more. But I have a couple of questions for you guys. And my first one is this. I would like people to know, how did you grow up? What's your history? What's your family history? And what does life look like for you right now?
Sweet. Well, I guess I will get to go first. So I was born in Chicago. Well, Evanston, which is a north suburb of Chicago. Really doesn't qualify as Chicago, but I was the token black kid in a white suburb. And we went from Chicago to Indianapolis to Michigan. So inside my family, two parents at home, in the church, but it's primarily an extended black unit. There was some sprinkles of Caucasians and some Latinos in my family unit as well, but my story really is in the suburbs, and then it clashes with tension when it comes into the city, when it comes into more of folks that look like myself. So it really is trying to navigate the space between suburbs and city living and thought as well. And today I get to serve the west side of the city of Indianapolis, MLK and Riverside. There's a lot of unique dynamics there, so really trying to reach people where they are, bring the light of Christ into their conversation, into their life, but also trying to navigate how to deal with folks from the suburbs and that conversation about city. So thrilled to be doing it, and even with the challenges, God is breaking down doors.
So I grew up a pastor's kid, and there's two types of pastor's kids. There's the rebellious pastor's kid and the religious one. So I'm the recovering Pharisee. Fortunately, didn't rebel like crazy. But one of the, I think, key components of my story, especially pertaining to this conversation, is my dad grew up as a missionary's kid in Haiti. And so I grew up with my dad's heart kind of setting the culture for our home to just love all people really well. But I also grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, which is also a very interesting place to have grown up, given the topic of this conversation. I don't know if it was sheltering or ignorance, but I didn't necessarily observe any kind of overt racism in my immediate spheres. I was in a suburb, so we weren't in the city. And it wasn't until many, many years later when my late wife and I moved to Indianapolis and moved into the city that I began to experience some more tensions involving race and just kind of beginning to observe and learn a lot more about that. And so now I remarried after my wife passed away to a beautiful woman named Christy. We have a 7-year-old daughter, Natalia, a 6-year-old son, Weston, and we have a 9-month-old. So we're just now getting sleep. And his name is Cohen, and we have the privilege of leading a ministry called Nothing is Wasted Ministries. We travel and speak at churches and share our story and really minister to people who are in trauma or tragedy or brokenness. And so it's unique to be able to step into some spaces where people are experiencing trauma from whatever realm it may be, and really helping them to rise up above that. So.
Well, I am a Midwest girl, so grew up in the Midwest. My parents actually grew up in Gary, Indiana, and after graduating high school there, they just wanted to pursue further opportunities for themselves educationally, and at that time, the opportunity was for them to enlist in the Air Force, and so they did that for 6 years and traveled, kind of where I get my travel bug from. And then following that, they settled in the St. Louis area. And I do remember key stories that my parents have told about that experience where they were pointed towards North County, which is an area of the St. Louis area where the black community is. And they were told by their real estate agent, you'll feel more comfortable here. Well, if you guys know anything about me, I get my rebellious nature from my parents. So they said, no one's going to tell us where we can and can't live. So they moved to the white suburbs and built a house in the community there. So I grew up the only black kid, on the block, went to private schools. So again, one of a handful of people of color in those settings. And growing up, my parents always instilled the value of education and hard work. And so went on to college, went on to law school, had careers in news and family law. And then after a monumental experience in Africa about 6 years ago, surrendered my purpose to Christ. Surrendered my heart at 19 after fighting for identity in all the wrong places. And in that surrender in, I guess it was 2013 now, became connected with Youth for Christ, and since then have been passionate about being that influence that someone was for me in my late teen years that allowed me to experience a true and complete identity in Christ. So currently, I'm married to a wonderful man, 2 kiddos, and I'm always looking forward to what the current training ground means for the journey ahead as we seek after his kingdom here on earth.
Well, I am Antonio Patton, as introduced, to be the Kingdom Chaser, the Pavement Pounder. And today we're going to backtrack to the kid that was in the window, raised by my mom and my great-grandmother, my mother being Mary Louise Patton, rest in heaven, my great-grandmother being Pearl Patton, rest in heaven. 2 individuals that stepped into my life, and I was a drug addict because my great-grandmother drugged me to church. She drugged me to church when I didn't want to go, when I tried to hide the shoe. It did not matter. 1 shoe or 2 shoes, you were going to church. But that never allowed me to have a relationship with him. That only allowed me to hear about him. Nevertheless, that void that was missing, a father in my life, 46 today, was sitting in the window and wondering why wasn't I good enough for him to return back to the pickup. So resentment hit my heart. I despised every man with a father, young and old, and it's set up a anger within inside of me that I mask. In that process of trying to deal with that, walking from school from home to school, school to home. In between that were drug dealers and gangbangers, and eventually I was intercepted by some infected love. Got involved with some of the chaos in my city. My hometown being Chicago, Illinois, South Side. Ventured from there to South Side of Phoenix, Arizona, and got involved and tangled with a drug deals, gangbanging. Nevertheless, along sitting in that window for years, wondering why Dad never returned, wondering why I wasn't good enough, all of a sudden comes Jesus personally. Tapped on me, removed my mom from this earth, and I was wondering, why did you do me like that? Why would you take the only person that could turn my frown upside down with a phone call or just a few words? But it wasn't until I came to know him that he took me back and said it was her that said, God, before you would remove him, remove me. Let him come to know you the way that I have. And to this day, I believe that those were my mother's last request, that, give him an opportunity to know you like I did. So all these voids and these masks that I had to wear and try to fill up, all of a sudden that window got all filled up with this man named Jesus. Oh my God. That's a whole nother story that I could go into, but nevertheless, current today, I chased those that were entangled in some of the same chaoses. So I would like to call it the belly of the beast. Sometimes you'll hear me say, leave them alone, they belong to me. And that's the king inside of me saying, those with the tattoos, the piercings, the sick, the afflicted, those that people don't want to deal with, the nasty, the wrote off, Jesus writes them in, and he pushes me into those places. So I like to run into the guts of those communities where these people are confused, broken, and feel like there's no hope. And current today, I'm a father of 6, husband of 1 beautiful wife, Tanisha Yvette Patton, a.k.a. the Fox, the love of my life, center of my soul. She is my queen. She is my pulse, my heartbeat, and the oxygen in my lungs. And I'm in love with this dude named Jesus, so I'm a Jesus freak. So I'm chasing those that's behind the mask because I know with real love, pure love, and that agape love, any man and any woman can be delivered.
It's good. So am I supposed to follow that now? Yeah, my name's Justin, and I grew up in Indianapolis. Went to Pike High School. Grew up there till my senior year. We transferred from Pike to Zionsville. My family moved to Zionsville, so that was a little bit of a culture shock. Grew up in a Christian family. My parents are real faithful and love Jesus, and I'm so grateful for that heritage. But yeah, kind of backing up at Pike, I would say Pike is the first place. I loved the diversity of it. At the same time, it was the first place that I kind of encountered racial tension. I can have specific memories of kind of the first times of witnessing that and kind of experiencing what that was like. And so, yeah, that's kind of, that was where I was first kind of made aware of it. But I would say realizing some of the issues around it and kind of beginning to wrestle with some of the things that I've agreed with didn't really happen until college, and some classes in college at IUPUI, go Jags. So it was kind of in that space that I started wrestling with some of these issues. So from high school, Pike Township, moved to Zionsville, got married to my wife, Jana. We've got 3 kids, a son who's 11, and then I don't even know how old, 9 and 7-year-old girls. And we live actually in Lebanon now. So we're small town Indiana. So from Pike to small town Indiana is a big transition and shift, but we're grateful to be there. And pastor here, and love partnering with Youth for Christ and City Life. I love these guys, and just so grateful to be part of this conversation. So.
My name is Danny Marquez, and I was born and raised in the Bronx. Mitchell Projects, 136th Street, Willis Avenue to be exact. In the projects, growing up in that kind of environment, you often seen, people getting shot, drugs being sold. This was the thing that was happening regularly. So going to school, trying to grow up in an environment like that, it was only a matter of a time before I was, introduced into that lifestyle and embraced that lifestyle. In the Bronx, as a Puerto Rican, I never experienced racism in my community. That's an interesting thing for me, because it wasn't until I left my community and started exploring outside of what I knew was when I started to experience racism as a Puerto Rican individual. And so growing up and connecting to the reality of racism and knowing that I grew up with just, a predominantly Puerto Rican and black individuals, racism was never really a thing for me. When I eventually, just made series of bad decisions because of having been introduced to the world of criminal activity, I eventually got locked up. I did over a 12-year sentence. I ended up doing 10 years and 8 months from that time. And I realized that while I was incarcerated, the amount of Spanish and black people that were incarcerated during that time, you can't help but to realize that is just a reality, especially in New York prisons. And so, grew up there eventually, while serving in Nassau County Correctional Facility, while serving time there, the Lord visited me while I was in my cell. He, showed up, and it was that moment that was a life change for me. I call it a revolution of the heart. The Lord revolutionized my heart and helped me to see my desperate need for Him. Finally, after having served the time for the crimes that I committed, finally came home on a mission. Just before I came home, the Lord spoke directly to my spirit and said, I want you to go back into the same kind of communities that you once helped destroy and start to rebuild them. So came home on a mission. And now I'm in Indianapolis, and I get to serve in that mission through Central Indiana Youth for Christ. And so today, currently, that's what I get to do. And I'm married to a beautiful woman. Her name is Amanda Marquez, and I love her. We have 3 children. And fun fact, I get along with my in-laws. They are amazing. Just want to put that out there.
I have a feeling that some of you were trying to make sure that if you had audiences out there, that you actually spoke to them directly. Justin, I do believe your wife is also a fox. I mean, I know you didn't say it, but she is, yes. Yeah. She is. All right. Hey, from a race perspective, one question that I have that I would love for you to each briefly answer is, what is one truth you are holding on to right now in the midst of all this racial tension?
Wow, that's somewhat of a tough question, but for me, I believe the true church that Christ is calling to Himself is diverse. So we can come up with excuses or history of why Sunday is so segregated, but we must fight to unify. In order to see him clearly, we must fight to unify.
I think for me, it's embracing two things: embracing discomfort. I think as all of this has kind of emerged, and being a white male, and stepping into conversations with friends of mine of color, it's uncomfortable asking questions that maybe I'm not sure how to ask those, but just embracing that discomfort and embracing what I would call the power of and. I feel like so much vitriol around this conversation and a lot of conversations in our country today is because there are polar sides that think the answer is either or. And I think it is okay for us to embrace tensions where there are realities that seem to tug on each other, and it doesn't have to be either or. There can be this is true and this is true, or we don't agree on this and we can still be unified. And so I think that power of and, I think I'm trying to figure out how to embrace that and lead other people to embrace it as well.
When I hear that question, I actually turn inward. And so I think a lot of what we're going through now as a nation, as a world, is because too many people are not turning inward. They're focused outward as to what this person needs to do or that person needs to do. So if I were to take your word tension and I were to turn it on myself, the truth that I'm hanging on to that actually is a lie is that I don't fit in. I am not black enough for the black community, and I'm too black for the white community. And so I feel as if in my life I've been a chameleon, and I've had to flex and move and adapt, and it's been exhausting, if I'm honest, but it's the reality and the tension that I live within in responding to even the issues that we're getting ready to talk about today because of that unique perspective that I have. But the truth is that my identity is in him. And so when I was younger and I didn't realize that, it led to reckless behavior. Still having that same tension in myself, knowing my identity is in him, there's a peace amidst the tension.
Wow. Wonderful. Well said, Yasmin. I will press into the number 5, which is the number of symbolic to grace. Love over hate, light over darkness, faith over fear, unity over division, Jesus Christ over everything. That is the place that I lean into.
That's good. Yeah, I think I've been, the question was a truth that I'm hanging on to. And I've been thinking about, like, Jesus doesn't invite us into things that he doesn't have every intention and capability to see through, And this issue it seems so big. It's so polarizing. It's so complex. For hundreds of years, the church Christendom, has such a central part in a lot of it throughout history. But Jesus says you're called to be ministers of reconciliation, and so he doesn't call us into something that he doesn't have every intention of seeing his church walk out and fulfill, And so I'm kind of just holding on to that, going, I don't know what it looks like, and it's going to be messy. And I mean, talk about I'm a white guy, and so I'm gonna, I love you, man, but I'm gonna ask really dumb questions sometimes, you know what I mean? But like the Holy Spirit in us is the spirit of unity and truth, and is the one that's going to work this stuff out. And I believe that we get to taste, obviously, Revelation 7, we see it fulfilled, all the way, but we get tastes of it now, And so I believe that we're called to that, and that it's truth. It's not pie in the sky. It's something that God's going to do and is doing right now.
So I've been chewing on the idea of kingdom-inspired diversity, and as I was chewing, I pulled out a pen and just started writing, and this is something that I wrote that is true for me for sure. The only way to achieve kingdom-inspired diversity is by having an authentic, loving relationship with God, which leads to authentic, loving relationships with people. Kingdom-inspired diversity is not only a high value, for us as a national movement, it is an attribute that flows directly from the heart of God. If we are to be a reflection of God's heart for humanity, this kind of diversity will be manifested through our commitment to abiding in the Father and loving others well, regardless of ethnic background, socioeconomic status, or creed.
So we're going to move into just allowing my friends to talk. But the reason that you're either watching this now or you have chosen to stay on to this point later is because potentially of the word reconciliation. And you've got enough of an interest to know what it means to be a person that reconciles under the name of Jesus. And so we want to invite you in. We want you to listen. We want you to lean in and just start having the Holy Spirit talk to your heart and your soul, and to see how you can join us in being a minister of reconciliation. As you can tell, it's really easy to love my brothers and sisters. I do. I love you all dearly. And I'm so thankful that we're going to enter into a conversation that is going to be real. It's going to be raw. It's going to be authentic. And I'm just going to kick off with, because Yasmin, I've heard you say this. You've said to me a couple of times and in settings, you're not a fan of collective consciousness, collective thought. And I'd love for you to start us off as a family. Why is that? Why is that something that you just kind of want to set straight a little bit in your mind and in other people's minds? And then I would love for you guys to just enter into this dialogue and pull everybody in that's watching. So Yasmin, tell us a little bit about that.
I guess the tension in my spirit on that is that there's no one person that's the supreme authority on thought or issues with respect to race. So, or any other issue, right, for the matter. And we have to be really careful. Like if we look to the Word of God, 1 Corinthians chapter 12 just talks about unity and diversity in the body, right? And how if everybody was a hand or if everybody was a foot, right, how would the body work? And I think that we need to recognize that on issues of race. I know that's what we're talking about here, diversity, culture, that there is no one right answer. You mentioned this earlier. There's an and, right, not an either or. And so during these tumultuous times, I've had people come to me and ask, well, how do you feel? Or I stand with you, as if, or I stand with all people of color, as if we all stand in the same place. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that everybody has a unique perspective based on background. We've all talked about our growing up years and what life looks like now, and there's diversity in that, which means that we're all going to have a different perspective as to what's going on in our world and how that affects the people that we know and love and the people that we're reaching out to. I don't know, Antonio, have you ever had the experience where you were being asked to be the authority on all thought on a particular topic with respect to race and culture?
What you're saying that, yes, and it's very scary because I only can share my personal experience, and that can't be the truth for everybody that looks like me, because my personal experience and the way I perceive something or what I'm pressing into is not the gospel. It's Antonio's gospel, which can always be messed up. Not much. All the time, it is jacked up. Not majority, not some of the time, because you become self-righteous in that place, So yeah, I have, and unfortunately, what do we do? Let me give that question back to you, Yasmin. What do we do to individuals that look to somebody that has a relationship, but the person that asks the question don't have that relationship with Christ? How do you give them that answer?
Anybody want to field that one?
I mean, I think the introduction of love is the start to the conversation. So if you're talking to someone who has not been met with Jesus Christ yet, what does the definition of love mean to them? And it's probably going to be misguided and wrong and not represent Christ, which is love. But I think that's how you start to introduce how we serve him, but also serve others as well. And just on the concept of, being a voice when folks are asking. So when COVID happened, when unfortunately George Floyd was killed, there's a lot of people that were, what do we do? How do we be a part of the conversation? So instead of looking at one, how do we look at 100 and invite 100 responses? So how do we call the church or call voices to the table? Do you guys have any thoughts on extending that invitation?
So I know for me, you think about this idea of being the authority, or sometimes feeling the pressure of, wanting to, or rather the expectation that you're the authority on the subject. And I don't know that I fit into that. On the flip side of that is more of, I feel like sometimes a referee in a sense, right? Where as a brown, to put a label on it, right? I actually hate those labels, but as a Puerto Rican, right, that is dealing with a black community and a white community, it's just a different experience for me, right? Because I'm around a lot of white people that have a whole lot of questions, right? And I'm around a whole lot of black people that have, some of the things that they're crying out about, right? The injustice, the systems that are in place, and so forth. So there's times that I find myself with black people like, yeah, I get it, bro. I really understand. And it's interesting for me because I'm not black, so I can never speak to the black experience. Recently, I had a gentleman reach out to me and say, hey, listen, let me ask you a question about, this or that. And I'm like, listen, I'm not an authority. Let me go reach out to some black brothers that I know that can speak to that. I can only speak to race from a Puerto Rican perspective, and this is what I'm dealing with. So on the white side, it's more of the conversation of, the questions that are coming and me kind of trying to talk about, hey, this is the experience that I've had personally growing up. This is when you speak about the idea of injustice and, racial inequality and all these different things, this is what I've experienced personally. And so my point is that, as a Puerto Rican, I kind of sometimes feel like a referee. And sometimes, just to be brutally honest, sometimes I feel like I'm left out of the conversation. Like it's only a black and white issue. And I'm like, hold on. Hello, I'm over here too. And I deal with it as well. Recently I went to Tennessee and my wife and I, we went to a Walmart, and it was interesting because I had some glasses on. And when I had some sunglasses, and as I'm going into the store, I see people, white people specifically, like looking at me, with what seemed to be hatred or what seemed to be just a high level of tension in their heart. And I was able to scrutinize their looks because I had the shades on. So I'm just watching and observing. They have no idea that I'm doing that because, they don't feel challenged because I got those shades on. And what was interesting about that experience, I got tough skin. I could deal with that kind of thing. I've dealt with it, growing up and so forth. But what was interesting is that as I'm walking, I noticed that I was not the only person that was the subject of hate. They were actually looking at my wife almost with more hatred in their eyes than they were at me. And I realized then and there that my wife making the decision to marry a person like me, I don't know, maybe it's culture, the fitted cap, the Jordans, whatever it is that, people see and they like, or they make that connection to urban lifestyle and, black experience or whatever. I don't know where it comes from, but the reality is that my wife is married to me. And when she gets those looks, I'm like, hold up, this is deeper. And it occurred to me very clearly more than ever before that we're not dealing with a person. This is a spirit. And, Yeah, I'll just stop there. It's a spirit. I was about to get real theological and go into it, but that is a real thing. And it's interesting because as I'm experiencing that, it didn't only happen there. I go further into Tennessee, and that was in London, Kentucky, by the way. Went further into Tennessee to Gatlinburg, same experience. My wife was more the subject of hate than I was, and I found that to be interesting.
Danny, I'm really curious and to hear from all of you guys on this. When was that? Was that after kind of all these tensions began to arise?
That's
after
a
George
great
Floyd
question.
Was killed?
Yes, so it was during.
It was during all of that.
Actually, let me think about it. Yeah, it was when it all started popping off.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it. I actually unplugged. I left Indy. I had no idea why the circle was closed that day. I later learned that they were doing a protest of some sort. And then, some time goes by. I had no idea that people were rioting and people, that this was, it was going to the level in Indianapolis that it was going to. And so it happened during that time.
Yeah, I wondered that, and I'm curious to hear from all of you guys on, since that has taken place, has the temperature or degree of which maybe you felt some of those tensions, like, specifically looks from white people, or has that elevated, or what kind of responses have you guys experienced coming from a perspective of color now that the climate has kind of been infused with a lot of this tension? Is it different? Is it the same? I'm just curious about that.
I would say it was different for a time, believe it or not. So when it was the height of everything, the text messages were rolling in, people wanted to meet, those types of things.
So you were met with more compassion, empathy, you felt in that?
Curiosity, but
okay.
also some, to Allie's point earlier, some social consciousness statements as well that I knew was not necessarily coming from the person searching their own heart potentially, but from this is how I should respond, so I'm seen as an ally and not an enemy.
Almost to make themselves feel better, or to kind of put themselves in a certain camp, or how would you evaluate that? Did you have any evaluation?
I believe the heart was sincere behind it, but I think people just don't know what to do, and they don't know what to say. So if socially they're saying, do this, say this, black out your Facebook page, then I'm going to do that so I'm seen as an ally. And if I don't, then am I seen as an enemy? And they struggle with that. So not knowing what to do, I think you just grasp onto the thing that is socially relevant. Now, though, the headlines have died down, people have gone on vacation, kids are back in school, and no one's talking about it anymore, unless you're living in some of the cities that are still dealing with it. And there's some that are still dealing with it on a daily basis. So,
I mean, I think to that point, it's the rise and fall of the trauma, of the incident. So in Chicago, there was a young life taken by a police officer. I don't really know all the details of it, but they went bananas, didn't they? Like a couple weeks ago. And so it's when it's top of the media or top of conversation, you do get some more attention to it. But then a couple weeks, months later, it's just life is normal. And I think that's why the protest is ongoing in this season, to say, listen, we're protesting for 20 years ago. We're protesting for 10 years ago. We're protesting for the names you guys don't even know. We're sick of the injustice of whether it is police brutality against a certain race, or whether it's just an unwillingness to listen and be with those stories. I think in our culture, we're trying to, be a culture of quick fixes. Instead of going from A, B, C through the alphabet, we're like, okay, can you go to A to R? And then I'll finish out going letter by letter. When this conversation is going to take every single letter and time with every single letter. Matter of fact, use the letters in some words. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's calling for much more time together. And the unfortunate thing that I feel, which might lead to another question, is that we're somewhat grouping up in pockets and talking to each other, which in the black community, around the voices that I've heard, there is aggression there. There is this do we have to take this Malcolm X point of view by any means necessary? Or can we be in the church and look to unify and love? But from what I've heard, it's more of an aggression rising, which does bother me because I don't think Christ is in that. So what do you guys think in maybe all white spaces or the black spaces or the Latino, Puerto Rican spaces? Are conversations staying inside or are they happening in the mixed community?
I definitely want to dive in there. Social equality, society has dismissed the pain of the African American experience in the country and the nation across the world. So, as you were saying, when the height of it, I believe in my hearts of hearts, the frontline soldiers is us, the body of Christ. We are the ones that are supposed to be intentional on being on the front lines for the kingdom's sake, not allowing that heightened pocket to just drop. We are supposed to speak into that until change starts to impute itself across every facet of life. And in my house, it hasn't died because I refuse to allow it to die. Because it was just last week when the young man was shot in Chicago, and similar to a young man that was shot here in Indianapolis. That name being screamed from our community being Dejon Reed. And our community refused to do a lot of research. We're emotional. And in emotion with our youth today, I always like to refer to the cortex. When it don't go through the sternal to the frontal lobe, this is a dangerous place. That's impulsive, that's reactive, there's no thinking process. Let's just do, let's just do, let's just do. We haven't done any research, we haven't took any time to try to find out the truth to what is going on. I don't want to press into that at this moment because I know right now whoever's watching live is probably going crazy right now because I've hit a chord, because this kid looks like me. But once again, the law enforcement was seeing as just blue. Nobody's seen behind the blue uniform a father, a mother, a husband, a brother, a sister, a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. And from that emotional place, we then discredit that there's a human that wears that armor. There's somebody's mom, there's somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's friend, somebody's confidant that's behind that uniform. But in this place of heightened, this is not just George Floyd today. This is 400 years that I speak into young men and women that feel like the system has failed us for a long time. So when that opportunity for my white brothers and sisters to step into that place, I believe God had poked and pricked the heart of people that lived in racism, that God was like saying, hey, now you see, race, hate is not born, it's taught. So when God prompts somebody and they want to admit that I was wrong, sometimes we do a disservice to let them come in because we frighten them right back out. Because we're all thinking from here. We're not taking the time to process and really research out. Man, this is scary. My brother here, he said, man, I want to come and walk with you. We could cut it with a knife. As a father, his son, his heir, his successor was with him. My son, my heir, my successor was with me. We're walking in for the namesake and for what is hot right now. But my brother, as Danny was talking about what he witnessed behind the shades, we didn't have no shades on. It was evident that they were saying, what is he doing here? Why is he with you? But on the account of the love that God has allowed me to do in the community, some would look at me and be like, he's okay. He's okay to come in. But man, what do you do? Is his love rejected because of pigmentation of his skin? Why do we question his love because he's white? Is his love not pure enough because of his skin? Those are the things that we as the body of Christ cannot let go back down to the shallow parts. We have to stay full force, and we've got to stay on that front line, and we've got to press as Jesus did when he walked this earth. He didn't walk this earth and leave it. When he came somewhere, change came. We have to be that change.
So I think you guys are hitting on some really important points, and some of them, are different. And I want to touch on a couple, so long as my mind allows me to, remember some of the things that was kind of processing as you guys were talking. So you spoke about the emotional response, right? And I often say that sometimes we are finding ourselves fighting a spiritual battle by carnal means. And that's a problem, because whenever we're up against, we know as Christians that there is spiritual wickedness in high places. The people are God, they are creations of the living God. They bear, each of us, black, white, Hispanic, it don't matter. We bear the image of God, right? As such, if we're seeing sin and, and again, we're talking Christianese here, right? If we're seeing sin and we're seeing all these different issues happening, in our city and so forth, the reality is that if we give an emotional response to that, we're always going to get an emotional response. And that's where the riots start to come up. That's where the tensions start to rise and all these kinds of things. So I think it's really important that as Christians, that we do not ever expect a non-Christian to act like a Christian. We got to bear in mind always that they are going to be who they are. Our job is to simply be that reflection of God that he's made us to be. Really important. Another important point that you brought up, you kind of said in passing, but I really feel is worth touching on, this reality of spending time with people. Man, so give you a random example. One time I'm cooking in the backyard for my family. I'm ready to go, right? And I forgot what we cooking, some potatoes, I think it was, you remember? David just shows up at my house in the backyard. I'm like, yo, what's up, D? And he's like, yo, what's up? And he comes over. I'm like, bro, what you doing right now? Let's go eat, right? Like, we didn't have that on the agenda. It was just a random moment, taking advantage of the moment to invite a young man to be a part of my family experience. It was an honor for me, a pleasure for me. I think that if we get into a place that we are willing and ready to invite people, no matter what, when we look at other pigmentation, sometimes there is a little bit of because there's assumptions that are made. I think that's a big problem as well. We make assumptions, and we will never know the truth until we spend time with the people and ask the questions. So what does it look like to open up our tables to families, to invite them in and ask questions that, otherwise you will be making assumptions about, and I really think that's an important piece to highlight, the assumptions that people make based on their own truth, what they gather as real in their own life, Yeah.
And just to back up off of that point, that time at dinner was amazing. It was not just food. Matter of fact, that was the last on the list. Really asking good questions about my story, them sharing their stories, showing me their home, their heart, really. And so it was a beautiful time. And it just kind of leads me to the question of Justin and Antonio. Antonio invited Justin into one of the worst areas in Indianapolis. And if you guys want to go, Antonio will show you the way.
42nd and Post, the new Ford Deuce.
The new Ford Deuce. But Justin, as an image bearer, the one that was being looked at, how did that make you feel? Did you and your son have any conversation after that? I mean, what were your thoughts about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt the eyes, I mean, you can't. Antonio, I could tell that he was kind of being the gatekeeper, and so me and Antonio are walking along, and my son and his son are behind us, and your nephew, I think, and Yeah, I honestly, it was really, so I felt those tensions, and I felt like in my life, I can like, on a hand or two, can pinpoint the number of times that I felt like the outsider. You know what I mean? And that was probably one of the most acute experiences of that, where I was like, all right, this is what it's like. I am not like everybody else here in the sense of life experience, race, all those types of things. And so it was one of those really acute examples of that. And for my son, I was grateful for it in a sense, because on the drive home, I said, all right, bud, he's 11, what'd you think, And he had some questions, but the interesting thing about our kids is like, they're not looking at, it's the color of the skin isn't the question. It was, Dad, I've never, in Indianapolis, I haven't been in a neighborhood like this. I've been in your neighborhood quite a few times, and there's some rough spots there. I've never been in a place where the sides of apartments have just holes in them, and somebody lives there, and every apartment is like that. And remember back in the back, there was the one where you said it was an older lady maybe, and she tried to keep it looking nice. There was one that stood out. And so it was more about that. Dad, how do people live like this? And so I explained to him what you talked about with, people are incarcerated and don't have another option, and, or they've been evicted, or they, all those types of reasons that they happen to be living here. And he just said, Dad, that's not right. You told they charge $700 a month to live in that place, And so he automatically goes to, Dad, that's not right, So through all this, I think that was an experience where I just go, man, that's like, I'm grateful for that experience to be the outsider. And it elevates for me like the reality of this, white privilege thing that I've had several conversations with white folks over the last several months where it's kind of scoffed at, like, come on, like that's kind of the reaction a lot of times. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was in one sense like I wasn't scared because I was with Antonio, and like you've seen these guns, man.
You got some guns.
I would take him to battle any day, but it was unsettling, yeah. But then just kind of the thought of like these are children of God, and the reality of their life, it breaks the heart of the Father, And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you touch on something that's really important, in terms of environment, places where it seems like utter devastation in some cases. People are not able to pay their rent. As a result, of a lack of funding, people are going out robbing. I know in my experience, right, I went through the prison system. Just before I came home, they pretty much dumped me back into the same environment that I was trying to escape, right? I often tell the story about how I worked 80 hours for a job in Manhattan, and I ended up bringing home a check for $600. I went to the bank to cash that check, and because nobody ever told me that I needed a bank account, right, I didn't realize that by going to the bank to cash the check that they were going to turn me away and say I couldn't do it. So what was next? I had to go to the check cashing place, and they practically, I don't want to say the word rape, but they took all my stuff. Like they took full advantage. I walked away with about $450 or something like that after having worked 80 hours, right? And so I had to make a decision. Am I going to continue to grind and do what's necessary to keep myself out of prison and break out of this cycle? Or am I going to continue in this cycle and start robbing people again and start going into places and taking people's money and stuff like that? So even as I think about that, you think about recidivism, you think about people that are going to prison, people that are coming home unprepared for, engaging society and stuff like that. You got individuals that don't have that sense of direction. So as I'm talking about this, it really begs the question. I know your story, Dave, and I know that there are, part of your story is that you had, black individuals that came home they had done time and that kind of thing. They went on a robbery. I don't know what the full circumstances were, but in your situation, your wife was killed. Baby in the womb. You come home, splat. Can you speak a little bit to that experience and how did that affect you? And maybe what are some of the things that how are you processing now in light of everything that's happening?
Well, Danny, that's a very complicated question.
And I'm sorry that I know that's
no, it's
deep.
a good question. We talk about it a lot, so I am very comfortable talking about it, but there are a lot of complex emotions that are involved with it and a lot of complex processing. I think the beginning aftermath of all of that for me, I was so overwhelmed with shock and grief and sadness that the other realities that were at play had not really set in. The realities of 3 men, 3 black men, those hadn't quite set into me yet. In fact, until the arrests were made, it was a faceless crime, right? And so there wasn't, to be honest with you, it was almost easier when that was the case. Because really all I had to deal with was my own kind of internal processing of what had just happened in my life. But then when the arrests were made and I saw the 3 men's faces on the news, then the realities at play really began to start to consume me. And for the first time in my life, I felt hatred, rage. I began over the next few weeks feeling racism, to be honest with you. And the way it would play out is that I would see, as I'm driving down the road, I would see a young black man, who looked to be about 16, 17, 18 years old, kind of fit the description of these men that were arrested. And I would begin to immediately presuppose that person's story and immediately the feelings that I had of the 3 men that killed my wife, that rose up toward that person. It's the first time I ever experienced feeling, and I literally had the conscious thought like, oh my gosh, this is racism. Like I'm feeling this now. And so there was some serious work that I had to do with the Lord. And also, I think for me, it was super helpful because in the journey, I got connected to a black pastor down in the Riverside area, and I began to explain to him those feelings I was having. And putting those out in the open, airing them, giving them, putting them, it almost immediately began to eradicate those feelings, especially when it was met not with judgment or how dare you or you're just like one of them kind of defense. It was met with, I understand. And then together we began to kind of untangle what that looks like from a biblical perspective and began to talk about what it looks like to forgive. And the crazy thing is I began to learn some of the stories, the backstories behind these men. And God began breaking my heart. Because I think to your point, what you said is when you begin to learn people's stories, it changes everything. No longer is it actions or these things that are just kind of playing out on a surface level. Now there are deep, rich complexities that it creates and it elicits inside of you this empathy and this compassion, and you're like, man, honestly, when I look at your story, I'm not sure how you get out of that kind of pattern of behavior. And honestly, that's what led me on the journey to connecting with you guys at Youth for Christ and going, I want to be an agent to help bring young men out of that particular pattern, the systemic patterns that are happening in our city and in our country, so that doesn't happen to another family, so that we can intercept them with the gospel. I don't know if that answered your question, but
It
that
does,
was,
man. Thank you so much for sharing
Thank you
that.
so much for that.
Wow, you guys, that 40 minutes after our introductions went so quickly. And the good news about that is when you leave something hanging and we've got to wrestle with it, I think that's good, right? I mean, you know me well enough to know that I'm all about good conversations and leaving you in the middle of tension. And so this is part one of 3 parts that we would invite you to. More conversation, more digging into what does it look like to have white privilege? What can the white church do? What can the black church do to come and be part of the look of what does the kingdom really look like? And my hope is that what we've started today, is that when you start to see people who love and trust each other, who know each other's stories, that's a wonderful starting point, because out of that place we can build reconciliation. I love what one of you said was having a meal, right? Have a meal with somebody, maybe not, always pepper them with questions, but what does it look like if I hear your story, I start to love who you are, and when I know how to love you, maybe I can start to understand. And so that's the start of our journey, 1 of 3. We'll be doing this again live next Friday, I think a little earlier, but we'll always put it on later for you to watch. Ask your questions. If you know one of us, please feel free to reach out, but put them on Facebook, put them on this format, and we will actually answer some of those questions moving into the next 2 weeks. Again, I love you. I respect everything that you stand for, and thank you for sharing parts of your story with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you
Thanks,
for having
Allie.
us. Thank you.